Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, April the 11th, 2024. Yesterday I talked about the Mars-Saturn conjunction and I listed a few people who have this aspect, and I looked at the comments and there were other suggestions about people who also had the conjunction between Mars and Saturn. A couple of people mentioned that Dolly Parton had this conjunction. Another person with Mars-Saturn conjunction was Lula, the president of Brazil. And so I thought, yes, let's look at the horoscopes very quickly of Dolly Parton and Lula. Also, I think the Prime Minister of Denmark has a conjunction with Mars and Saturn. That is, I think her name is Mette Frederiksen, so I thought I'd have a quick look at her chart as well, though I'm afraid I don't know anything about Danish politics. Someone else who's got Mars-Saturn conjunction is actually, well, an organisation, Mossad. So there are 4 charts I want to look at. I want to look at also the horoscope of the Pope. I have never looked at the Pope's horoscope before, Pope Francis, and there have been some recent concerns about his health. I think he miss some celebration, was it on Palm Sunday or on Good Friday? I don't know, I haven't really been following the news, but there have been concerns about his health. I think he has been known to have bouts of influenza and bronchitis. So recently his health hasn't been in great shape, but let's not forget he was born in 1936. He's 87 years old, and so one might expect him to have a few health issues, though I'm sure that there's no particular cause for concern. I don't think. I haven't really looked at his chart, that he's 87 years old, and having another look at his chart might be, having a look at his chart, haven't even started looking at his chart, that might be a good thing to do. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Thursday, April the 11th, 2024. So here is the chart for today, set for New York at noon. And we notice that the moon at noon in New York is at 1 degree 47 minutes Gemini. So the moon goes into Gemini today. To be precise, it goes into Gemini at 1:58 p.m. in the afternoon in London. So just after lunch. That means it goes into Gemini at 8:58 in the morning in New York, and even earlier in the West Coast, California, Washington, Oregon. It goes into Gemini at, what would that be? That would be 5:58 in the morning. So if you're in the Americas, the moon is in Gemini for most of the day. If you're in Europe, it goes into Gemini lunchtime, early afternoon. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, East Asia, then really the moon goes into Gemini tomorrow, and the moon is in Taurus all day long. So that's one thing going on. And we do have a few aspects. The moon, before it moves into Gemini, there's the moon in Gemini, in Taurus, it makes a sextile to Neptune. It's a gentle aspect, moon sextile Neptune. We might hardly feel it, but I think it does make us a little more sensitive than usual. We may pick up on some emotional details that could be useful. Then, when the moon does move into Gemini, it makes a trine aspect to Pluto. Again, it is a fairly gentle aspect, but it may allow us to exercise our power and to express our feelings and to create a minor transformation, but I don't think anything dramatic, though I think it could be useful. But possibly the main thing going on today and tomorrow is a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury. So it kind of depends on your time zone. If you're in the Americas, it's going to be late today, I think. If you're going to be anywhere further east, it's going to be tomorrow. And so it's not just a one-day wonder, this, but this Sun conjunct Mercury is a somewhat controversial aspect, because how do you treat the Sun being exactly conjunct Mercury? Because when it is exactly conjunct, it is known to be a cazimi conjunction. I think that's when the Sun and Mercury are within 17 minutes, and they're 17 minutes apart. And if you're in the Americas late in the day, you do start to feel this cazimi conjunction. And what does it mean? Well, normally a conjunction between the Sun and another planet is unfortunate because the Sun gets burnt up. When Mercury moves towards the conjunction of the Sun, it is difficult because it can't see properly because the Sun is blinding it. But there is a view that when it gets really close, within 17 minutes, the Sun and the other planet start to move onto the same wavelength. They become cazimi. It's like the planet is so resonating with the Sun that it can't be hurt by the Sun, and it actually becomes stronger. So it may be a time for experimentation. What does it actually mean for this Sun conjunct Mercury, the exact Sun conjunct Mercury? Well, we may have a moment of absolute clarity. It's a situation where we start going into the situation and being completely confused. We haven't got a clue what's going on. Then suddenly everything is clear. Just like that. It's all clear. We understand what's going on. And all the doubts disappear, the confusion disappears, and the truth is right in front of us. That is one view. Of course, it may be the case that cazimi, the concept of cazimi, is over-optimistic, that when we do get close to the Sun, when we get right close to the Sun, maybe we are completely burnt up. Okay, not literally, but we just can't see anything. But with the Sun with Mercury getting so close to the Sun in general, and the Mercury being retrograde, I think we can say that Mercury is starting to be in quite a difficult situation. We have to be very careful about making decisions at the moment, because there are big things happening, big distractions going on, which may make it almost impossible for us to really understand what's going on, and there is a danger of making mistakes. So I would have said some caution is required, though look out for the cazimi moment when everything clears, when you absolutely understand what's going on. But even then, ask yourself, is it really clear? Because we do have to be careful. Mercury is not in a good position, and I'm not convinced that we can rely on cazimi to give us a full view of the truth. Then there is the heliocentric position. So let's look at the positions of the planets from a heliocentric perspective. That means putting the Sun in the middle of the solar system. So here is the cazimi universe, or rather, because what was I talking about? That makes absolutely no sense at all. I'm sorry. This is the solar system from the perspective of the Sun. When you put the Sun in the middle of the solar system, there is the Earth at 22 Libra. There is Uranus at 2245, Taurus. So the Earth is making a quincunx to Uranus. And that may be problematic. When we see this kind of aspect, it doesn't matter really whether it's a quincunx, trine, square. Okay, maybe a quincunx is not going to be as strong as a square, but with the Earth moving to a quincunx of Uranus, that suggests that there is a bit of instability creeping in. Uranus is the planet of instability, of things going wrong, things happening that we weren't planning on, and Earth making a quincunx to Uranus could start to stir it up. That quincunx is possibly not going to be exact until tomorrow, depends on where you are, but today, tomorrow, Earth is quincunx Uranus, so we do have to be very careful there. But it's not the only thing going on, and there is actually a very fortunate thing going on in this heliocentric chart. Let me show you. There is Venus at 18 Pisces, and there is Jupiter at 24 Taurus. So Venus and Jupiter kind of making a sextile, not exact though. So where is the midpoint between Venus and Jupiter? So if you look at Venus at 18, Jupiter at 24, so the midpoint is going to be at 21 Aries. You'd agree on that? So 21 Aries is the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. And is that right? So we have got this Earth-Mercury conjunction, which is starting to form opposition the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. And so this may actually be quite a happy combination. You know, I try not to be positive unless I really have to be. That's just me. But with the Earth-Mercury conjunction on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, for many of us, there may be cause for happiness. Things may start to work. If we do the right things, they can work very well for us. And if we make a special effort to be happy, then the solar system is going to appreciate that, perhaps, with Venus-Jupiter so well configured by the Earth and Mercury. Yes, the solar system wants us to be happy. And so we need to make a special effort. It could be hard. I don't think, I'm not the sort of person that can just make themselves happy for the sake of it, but maybe you can. Yeah, do try, if you can, to be positive and optimistic and do Venus-Jupiter stuff, like celebrating and laughing and smiling. It may feel all a bit of a waste of time. You may wonder what the point is, but you'll be picking up on something going on in the solar system. And if you give out something positive and happy, then maybe you will receive good fortune back for your efforts. So I think there is something good going on in the heliocentric chart. Let me now turn back to the geocentric chart and consider what is going on today from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for today, Thursday, April the 11th, 2024, for the 12 signs. Aries. Aries, you're continuing to feel pretty good. I mean, this is a good time for Aries, let's not forget. The sun is in your sign. It has been since around March 21st. It's not going to stay in your sign forever, though. I mean, the sun is now at around 22 Aries. In just over a week, it will be out of Taurus. It will be out of Aries and into Taurus. And, I would suggest that you make the most of the opportunity because, this is your time of year. It is still your time of year. And I think that you are very engaging at the moment. So make sure you have people around you with which to engage your various abilities. If you've got any artistic talents, then today is certainly the time to bring them out into the open. I don't know what these talents might be. It might be music, it might be painting. I suppose it might be something to do with business, but if there's some kind of talent that you have, but I think it's particularly a talent that's to do with beauty, aesthetics, of that nature, then I think now might be the time to tell people about it. And Aries, it's just very important that you don't doubt yourself. I mean, there's no reason for Aries to doubt itself, is it? I mean, Aries is not a sign known for doubting itself, so just be an Aries. And also, if you're in the Americas, certainly, and this afternoon if you're in Europe, take advantage of the fact that the moon is moving into Gemini. I think from your perspective, this is quite a good thing, because Gemini is a sign that is quite sympathetic to Aries. They're both positive, but there's a nice balance. Gemini is an air sign, Aries is a fire sign. It allows you to really express yourself, and it goes back to what I was saying with that talent of yours that really needs to be brought out into the open. And in your own way, you can create something of a transformation, because the moon is making a trine to Pluto. And with this trine to Pluto, you can really change things, but you have to express things before change can really happen. If you're silent, then, well, unfortunately, you can't really expect anything to happen at all. So it is important, Aries, that you push out this positive energy, and maybe that also links with what I was saying about the heliocentric lineup. You know, Earth is conjunct Mercury. It's on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. The solar system, as a spiritual entity, wants people to be happy and optimistic. There are other things going on in your chart to suggest that you can be happy and optimistic. So really, you've got an opportunity here. One thing that might create a few problems is other people. You know, you're fine, but some of the people close to you that you have to deal with on a one-to-one basis might be hard work. They might try to drag you down. They might raise objections. They might see the whole world as just being too intense. In certain situations, they might even try to engage in a power struggle, and that would be really very inappropriate. So it's important that you're not overly dependent on other people, and consider the possibility that there are people out there who have the capacity to spoil the party, and you need to know who those people are, because I think it's a day when you should probably stay away from them. Taurus. In some ways, Taurus, you might be hard work today because there are a lot of things that you're taking seriously. I mean, I think that is a fairly typical Taurus thing, because Taurus is quite a serious sign. It can be quite a serious sign. I suppose Taurus is fixed, and it's an earth sign, and when it decides that something is important, that's it. Taurus wants to just get on with it, and you're not going to perhaps be looking at what else is happening. And there could be really a certain amount of intensity today. You feel that there are things holding you back, and you want to break through and make your presence known. And at the same time, you might be quite concerned by the power equation. So the power equation would be about who has the power, who doesn't have the power. Does Taurus have the power, or does someone else have the power? And you might feel that you have to do something about the power equation. If you feel you don't have enough power, you might want to do something to shift the equation. So that is a possibility. And at the same time, you might feel that you have to assert your view of the world. Now, I don't want to say that that is a bad thing to be doing, provided you have a clear set of goals. You have an idea about what you want to achieve. You maybe have a time limit on it, and you perhaps have a set of steps about how you're going to achieve it. So if you can be very focused like that, then that's good. Then today you have a real opportunity to assert yourself. But if it's all about some vague feeling of frustration and you feel you're not being taken seriously enough and you just want to get attention, that's not so good. You're not going to be constructive at all. And, you could end up causing a lot of damage. So do consider that and try to exercise some restraint. Unless, of course, you're exercising constructive focus, which is what you should be doing. Constructive focus is going to be very important today. Now, if you are in the Americas and Europe, then you may find that at some stage in the day there is a bit of focus on money. And I don't mean that in a bad sense. I think that you can do something pretty useful in the financial arena. You can make some changes which do give a boost to your finances. This might relate to your work. So if you decide you should be paid more money, or you want to do things which are more profitable, or perhaps work extra hours, then this is something you can do, because I think you're going to be very effective. And I suppose that feeds back into what I was saying about you having focus. If you really have focus, then I think you can use this focus to boost yourself financially. So consider ways in which you may be able to get yourself more money. Now, I'm not saying that means that you get extra money today. It's more about setting up a situation that brings you more money in the near future. So, Taurus, do consider what opportunities might be available in that direction. Gemini. There are a couple of things going on today which do have real relevance to you. Two events in particular. Firstly, Moon moving into your sign. Secondly, the Sun is making a conjunction to Mercury. Now, Moon moving into your sign, it happens every month. It's overall pretty fortunate. It's a time when you start to feel at home, when what's happening in the world out there and what's happening internally in your head, in terms of your feelings, they accord with one another. And I think it's a time when you are going to be able to really express yourself very effectively. Now, I do understand that not everyone is going to feel this, because if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, you're not really going to get the full blast of Moon and Gemini until tomorrow. If you're in America, it's pretty much all day long. If you're in Europe, it's more of an afternoon, evening thing. But whenever the Moon moves into Gemini, it's good for you. It allows you to express yourself and bring to bear really a certain amount of power. But the problem is that right now it could be argued that Mercury, your ruler, is in a fairly poor position because Mercury is retrograde and Mercury is very close to the Sun. So it might not be a good idea to make important decisions because you're going to be bombarded with facts and half facts and perhaps lies as well. You might misunderstand what's going on. You might get your priorities wrong. You might think that something is important when it's actually irrelevant, yet something that is trivial or appears trivial could be the key thing. So do consider that. Mercury arguably is at its worst, but as I said at the beginning, there is a time when Mercury is going to be cazimi. That means it's going to be right close to the Sun. That's going to be late in the day, maybe into tomorrow. I'm going to discuss the cazimi Mercury in more detail tomorrow, I think. So it is a today and tomorrow thing. It's not just today, and it does depend on the time zone. But this precision, when Mercury is right next to the Sun, is this precise moment could be really fortunate. So what you might experience, Gemini, is you start feeling really, really confused. You don't know what's going on. This is especially the case, by the way, if you're in a social situation. If you're going to a party or you're with people, lots of people around you, and these people are just going to make things worse and worse. They're talking about all sorts of nonsense. You can't concentrate. You're trying to work out what your priorities are. You're trying to deal with other people's priorities. And at the same time, you've got different experiences and you're perhaps having to move from place to place. And it's just all getting over the top and you just can't deal with it. And then suddenly there's a moment of clarity. And you see everything for what it really is. And you know it. You'll know it when it happens. And when that happens, you'll know exactly what's right and wrong. You'll be able to see the truth, assuming this cazimi effect works. And if it does, I think that could be a real benefit. It will be like the things that are conspiring to confuse you will in the end tell you what the truth is. And if that happens, and after that, armed with the truth, well, surely you can't go wrong, can you? And that's what Geminis secretly want, is the truth. Superficially, Geminis like to say that there is no such thing as the truth. It's all relative. They like to be very postmodern about it. But deep down, I think every Gemini wants the truth. Perhaps that's because the opposite sign to Gemini is Sagittarius, and there comes a point when we all jump into the opposite sign. I'm saying this as a Gemini, of course, but there can be that sort of reflex action with the opposite sign. And while this is going on, don't underestimate your power. Your power to be a dramatic, transforming authority figure. Even if you've got no authority, you don't regard yourself as being an authority figure, because in a certain setting, you can be an authority figure. Of course, it's easier if you already are an authority figure. In that case, yes, you're going to be able to really demonstrate your power. If you're not an authority figure, you don't feel that anyone cares about what you say or do, don't doubt yourself, because you can be an authority figure in the right place, when you hit that right place, when you're exactly there, people really are going to start to listen to you. So do consider that, even if at the moment that seems rather improbable. Cancer. The moon is starting to change sign, moving from Taurus into Gemini. So, when we look at the moon in terms of Cancer, we get an idea about what's going on in the Cancerian world. And with the moon starting to move into Gemini, you're starting to see the world in a slightly different way. You're starting to think about the world and not just feel what's happening. You're seeing alternative views, alternative opinions, and you don't have to act on these opinions, but you should certainly consider them, especially as the moon is making a conjunction to Pluto. And perhaps that's what really matters. It's not just the fact that, moon moving into Gemini, but trine Pluto, it allows you to get in touch with a certain power that you don't maybe normally express. And actually it's an intellectual power. I know that the textbook Cancerian is supposed to be very emotional, to be looking at sort of feelings rather than thoughts, but I think that is a bit of a generalization. Cancer is a complicated sign, and Cancers, very often, for example, make really good writers. I've talked about Cancers being some of the most powerful people ever, like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, but they also make brilliant writers. I think Hunter S. Thompson was a Cancer, and wasn't Ernest Hemingway a Cancer? But that shows the intellectual side of Cancer, which is sometimes neglected. And I think that that intellectual side of Cancer is starting to come into its own. And through the power of your thoughts and your intellect, you can create real change. So don't be afraid of looking at things from two perspectives and then suddenly coming up with an answer. But you need to do it on your terms. I don't think that today you really want to get heavily involved with other people and their problems. In fact, you may regard other people and their problems as being somewhat irrelevant, almost beneath you. And I think that is reasonable. It has been a tough week. We've had the eclipse and we've had the Mars-Saturn conjunction. Mars-Saturn conjunction is still there. And that Mars-Saturn conjunction, which is, it's still very close. And perhaps that's another reason why you want to keep some distance from other people. Saturn, after all, is ruler of Capricorn, your opposite sign. And so if Mars is conjunct Saturn, that might be about certain people trying to throw their weight around, trying to get attention, being inappropriately assertive. And do you really want these people around? Probably not. Maybe you've had them around over the last few days and enough is enough. So that's another reason to look after yourself and give yourself space, and to make sure that there aren't people out there trying to assert themselves and get you to do things you don't want to do, because really this is a time for yourself, and also a time, as I've just said, for thinking about your thoughts. And the intellect. Do not neglect your intellect today. because I think today you are actually very sharp. And so, yeah, it's very important, Cancer, that you don't underestimate yourself. Leo, you're, I think, in quite a friendly, gregarious mood. You want to communicate. You feel that you've got things to say, and I don't really think that you're going to want to be alone. And that's great. And it's just important that you don't crowd people out. Because what's happening today is that we've got a Sun conjunct Mercury aspect. Now, the Sun is arguably you, because the Sun is your ruler. But Mercury is getting really close to the Sun, and we might conceive of Mercury as being another person. And there's a danger that you might be so full of yourself that you prevent another person from properly expressing themselves. So in any situation, whether it's one-to-one or in a group, do give people a chance to speak. You might feel that you're the important one, but you're not entirely. You've got to give people a chance. That's really important, because there's something about your presence that just may be overwhelming. And overwhelming, I don't mean that in a good sense. So let people say what's on their mind. You will benefit from that. And this Sun conjunct Mercury may also be telling you about an internal process. We might be able to see the Sun conjunct Mercury in a cognitive sense. So the Sun is you, and Mercury represents your thoughts and the things you're picking up perhaps from the outside world. And in terms of that internal cognitive process, there might be things that you're shutting out. There's information coming in from the outside world that you should be paying attention to. But for one reason or another, you may decide that you don't want to pay attention to it because you're just not interested. I would suggest that you do pay attention to it, that all information, however trivial, does have to be considered. So I had to get that out of the way. But overall, I do actually think it is a good day. That Sun conjunct Mercury, which I've been negative about, I can also be positive about it, because the Sun is you, and with the Mercury conjunct the Sun, that says something about the quality of you in an ideal situation, and you're given this extra bonus of Mercury being close to you. This means that you actually can communicate in a very effective way, provided you give everyone space and you listen to what they say. That's the only thing. That's all you have to do. Just have to remember that communication is a two-way process. If you remember that communication is a two-way process, then you will be able to benefit from Mercury. And this is particularly the case if you subscribe to the Cazimi-Mercury theory, that the idea that when Mercury gets really close to the Sun, it actually gets strengthened. And that's perhaps for you is about the power of your personality enabling your words, whether written or spoken, to have extra strength so that they're able to hit home. And with moon trine Pluto, remember, is in Aquarius in your 7th house. I mean, after all, it's the 7th house because Leo is your sign, so Aquarius is the opposite sign. So Aquarius is 7 houses from Leo. So that is very connected with how you can link up with other people, and I do think that you can bring to bear a considerable amount of power, but you always have to get that balance right. If you have power, you need a certain amount of responsibility, or is it noblesse oblige? When you're in a position of power, you can afford to give other people a chance, to give other people a break. You can be so confident in your power that you can let people express themselves, let people be themselves, because it's not really a threat to you. Absolutely no need to feel threatened today, because you're the one with the power, so you don't have to show off about it. Virgo. Mercury is your ruler. And Mercury is in rather an interesting position. After all, it's going retrograde. We know it's going retrograde. It's been going retrograde for a bit of time now. And Mercury is very close to the Sun. It's a Cazimi conjunction. Is this a good thing? I think you do have to be careful, because there is something that may really restrict your ability to think clearly and to get your message across. And you have to ask, what might that be? I think that some of your own private thoughts may not be helpful. They're just getting in the way of seeing the reality of the situation. That is Mercury, your ruler, being blotted out by the Sun. And you have to ask yourself whether you're being unreasonable. This is particularly when we're talking about things connected with fears. We all have fears. I'm not singling you out for having more fears than anyone else, but I'm just suggesting that today some of your fears may be stronger than usual. And these fears might have the effect of restricting your ability to act in a clear and constructive way. But there may be a moment when the fears clear, when something from the depths of who you are shows you the truth of the matter. And that is because Mercury is Cazimi conjunct the Sun. It's so close to the Sun that the Sun doesn't damage it. And Virgo, you might reach a situation where your fears and your worries start to clear, and something deep down makes it clear that things really are okay. And we should not forget, Virgo, that there is a conjunction forming between the Earth and Mercury. Mercury is your ruler. This is a heliocentric conjunction, not a geocentric conjunction. And this Earth-Mercury conjunction is on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. So we've really got Mercury hitting the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, wrapped up with Earth. And the Venus-Jupiter midpoint is very fortunate. And this is a heliocentric event. So because it's heliocentric, it is more collective from personal. But I think you need to consider the concept of joy, because joy is there. The solar system actually wants you, Virgo, to be joyful. That might not sound realistic, but still, that's what the solar system wants of you. And I'm thinking about the solar system as a living entity. And if you can tune into what the solar system wants and be happy about things, then you will be rewarded. what if you're not feeling happy about things? Can you just perhaps create a bit of happiness? Now, I'm talking about something that I don't really understand myself, because I'm not that kind of person. I'm not the kind of person that can just create happiness out of nowhere. But I believe a lot of people who are less misanthropic than me are able to do this. I believe it is possible. And Virgo, you have to trust me. I think it is possible. So can you do that? Just try to create happiness out of nowhere. Because I think, at least in theory, the solar system may really appreciate that, and you might be rewarded for your efforts. Libra. The moon is moving into Gemini, where it aspects Pluto. Now, that is important from a Libran perspective, because we kind of have a grand trine forming. Now, it's not a real grand trine because there's nothing in Libra to make the grand trine. We've got the moon in Gemini. We've got Pluto in Aquarius. There's one trine, but what about the other trine? Where's the planet in Libra? Well, that's you. That's your sign. So Libra as the sign, as your sign, is linking up with Moon and Pluto. So we have a sort of grand trine effect here. And this is about you really being able to tune into your power and really make things happen. Okay, it does to a certain extent depend on time zone, because if you're in Australia, East Asia, the moon doesn't actually go into Gemini until very late tonight or even tomorrow. So there is a certain dependency there, but it will get there. And it is a time when, for Geminis, things suddenly start moving. And you can make things happen, but in quite a gentle way. You don't have to throw your weight around and take people on in an aggressive way to get results. No, you can just be yourself. And at the same time, Libra, you are aware of some of the things that in the past had been blocking you. They're very real. And you now have a chance to knock the walls down and to break free and to exercise, if need be, some quite dramatic power. It can be done. And I know, Libra, you might take the view that you don't want to cause too much trouble. I mean, Libra is a sign that likes to keep everyone happy. It doesn't want to rock the boat. But maybe you have to rock the boat a bit. Because as I said, it's a time when you can exercise great power. But I'm thinking you probably don't have to rock the boat too much because of this Moon trine Pluto. I think you perhaps, looking at it just from the perspective of today, if you want results and you're in the Americas and perhaps Europe, you can be more relaxed about it. If you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, I think you're going to have to be tougher. So it does depend a little bit on your time zone. But overall, Gemini, it's an interesting day. Sorry, it's not Gemini. I'm not talking to Gemini. I'm talking to Libra. Sorry. Libra. It's a day when you do have a lot of power, and at the same time you have access to new information. Perhaps part of a problem that you might have had in the past, where you weren't able to make things happen is you simply didn't have the information at your disposal. And you're getting that information. And you need to be looking for information, perhaps in new places. Where you are right now, you don't have all the information you need. And so perhaps you have to reach out, maybe to the other side of the world, or make a long-distance phone call and find out, because there's something that still needs to be found out. And once you get what you're looking for, it's going to be surprising, but at the same time, it's going to be fairly transforming. So, Libra, do take advantage of that. I hope, by the way, when I've been talking about Libra, I get this feeling that I've been saying Gemini instead of Libra in a couple of places. If I have been doing, my apologies. This is for Libra that I'm talking about this section. I'm not talking to Geminis. I'm talking to Librans, just to make that absolutely clear. Scorpio. Yesterday, there was a conjunction between Mars and Saturn. And that conjunction is still very much in force. Mars is less than a degree away from Saturn. It's true that this conjunction between Mars and Saturn is starting to separate, it's starting to weaken, but it's still very much there. And I think that you may be experiencing a few frustrations. You know that you're getting over them, but still it's annoying. And the question is how best to deal with them. I think there is a temptation, Scorpio, to be a little bit angry about the situation. There are things you want to do, and there are people holding you back. There are situations holding you back, and that does make you annoyed. But I don't think this is really a time for expressing your annoyance. It's rather like, those situations where someone breaks into your house, and if you're a gun owner, you shoot at them just as they're leaving. While you're in America, you're allowed to defend yourself, but you're only allowed to defend yourself if your life is in danger. When a person is leaving, even if they've stolen your stuff, generally you're not allowed to shoot at them. And if you do, you could get arrested for murder or something very serious. It's rather like that. The bad situation, if there is a bad situation, is coming to an end. The person is leaving. So you don't have to get aggressive just as someone is leaving. The situation is improving. And indeed, in some ways, it's you leaving. You realize that there was a bad situation. That bad situation caused its damage. It was frustrating. It was annoying. And now you're moving away. It's still pretty close, but you are moving away, Scorpio. And you're finding it easier to be yourself and to be creative. Though I should say, I just talked about crime, I suppose, shooting people. But there is this crime thing going on because in the jargon, I don't know, Mars is square the Jupiter-Cupido midpoint. And of course, Mars is your ruler. And Mars is square the Jupiter-Hades midpoint. And so Mars is you, it's square the Jupiter-Hades midpoint. Hades can be about the dark side of society, the dark underbelly of society, things that are a bit dodgy. But there's Jupiter. Jupiter is, in a way, sort of enjoying it, getting off on it. And things that are rather unpleasant may be of interest to you. Now, that doesn't mean to say you have to get involved with them and take risks. It's more perhaps that you just find it interesting, you want to learn about them, you maybe want to talk about them. You may find them sort of motivating and inspiring. So you don't have to get involved with anything illegal or unpleasant. Obviously, you shouldn't get involved with anything illegal or unpleasant, but at the same time, things that are illegal and unpleasant may have a certain attraction to you. And I suppose in certain situations, that's an attraction that might have to be resisted. But overall, Scorpio, things are getting easier, but yes, you're perhaps having some unusual interests today. Interests that maybe other people wouldn't appreciate, but I think you certainly seem to appreciate them, but you don't have to get involved with them. It may just be of intellectual interest. Sagittarius. The moon is moving into Gemini, and Gemini is your opposite sign. So it may be a time when some Sagittarians are having to engage with other people, maybe in a way they're not entirely comfortable with, but perhaps it's a bit of a relief for Moon going into Gemini. You know, the Moon has been in Taurus, and from a Sagittarius perspective, you know, Taurus is a sign that doesn't quite feel right. It just feels a little bit tedious. And there has been a bit of tedium over the last couple of days. But with Moon moving into Gemini, the world is becoming more interesting, and you do have a chance to meet interesting people. But if you meet interesting people, you shouldn't just think that it's just casual, that you can talk to someone for 5 minutes and then just go your merry way. Because the Moon is making a trine aspect to Pluto. And when you've got a trine between Moon and Pluto, you think about things like emotional transformation. But this is a trine. It's not a dramatic or stressful aspect. It's more gentle than that. But whenever you engage with someone, there is the possibility of change. You could change the other person, but also the other person could change you. And that is a possibility that you should be open to. Now, that might not be a possibility that you like the idea of, but maybe it's the right thing. You know, as a Sagittarian, the concept of variety is important to you. Just being in one place all the time is not great, especially over the last few days. You know, you're just coming out of a conjunction between Mars and Saturn in a very low profile and perhaps stuck sector of your chart, and so you need a bit of variety and relief, I think. And that Moon in Gemini trine Pluto should be able to provide it. But one thing about people you know well. Today, the Sun is conjunct Mercury. And Mercury, of course, is ruler of Gemini, which is your opposite sign. And this Sun conjunct Mercury can be about a lack of objectivity. Not your lack of objectivity, but another person's lack of objectivity. And some people who you come into contact with may either be really stubborn, absolutely sure that they know what's going on, but at the same time, they are completely deluded. And you have to watch out for these people. If someone is being really pushy, really assertive in terms of their ideas, seem to be convinced that they're in the right, then chances are they're completely in the wrong. They're being blinded by that Sun conjunct Mercury. And I know that Sun conjunct Mercury is cazimi. Theoretically, Mercury is supposed to benefit from this conjunction because it's so close. Okay, there may be a few people who speak with conviction and absolutely are right, but I think they're in a minority, and you'll be able to tell if you talk to them and engage with them. See how they respond to questioning and criticism. If they respond well to questioning and criticism, then maybe that's a good sign. But I think in most cases, people who have big ideas, people who are very vocal about expressing these ideas, people who are inflexible, these people should really be avoided. And I do think that fundamentally they're probably talking nonsense. And as a Sagittarian, I think you'll recognize this very quickly. Capricorn. There is this conjunction between Mars and Saturn, which was exact yesterday. Now, this conjunction between Mars and Saturn it's still there. It is weakening, but you can still feel its influence. Now, that might mean that you're quick to get angry still. You feel that you perhaps have to defend yourself. You have to speak up for what you believe in. So that is certainly one possibility. It may be that the Mars conjunct Saturn represents an annoying influence. And this annoying influence is particularly felt when you're talking to people. When you talk to people, the longer you talk to people, the more annoyed you're going to get. I think this effect was stronger yesterday, but I think it's still with you today. And it just might feel that people are not just being annoying, but they're getting in the way of your attempt to just organize things. And with the moon moving into Gemini, there are things you want to do that you want to do of a fairly constructive and organizational nature. And there are these people who are perhaps getting in your way. But it's not as strong as yesterday. And I think that as a Capricorn, you're very good at creating boundaries. And if you feel that an irritating situation is going on for too long, I think you'll be good at just saying, well, enough is enough. Perhaps ending a phone call. And if it's a face-to-face meeting, you'll know what to say to bring it to a close. And the moon in Gemini is making a trine to Pluto. And with a moon trine Pluto, Pluto is often associated with elimination. And it might actually be a very good day for eliminating things. Things that are just getting in your way, clutter, and that clutter can be all sorts of types of clutter. Clutter can be ideas, it can be objects, it can be people as well. So it's a great time to declutter your life. And perhaps, you've got stuff you don't need that you can sell. After all, Pluto is in Aquarius, which from a Capricorn perspective, the sign Aquarius is about money. It can be about money. So perhaps you can turn clutter into money. Also, I suppose it's possible you can make money out of clearing up someone else's clutter. I suppose that's possible. But that moon trine Pluto should be very useful to you. And once you start engaging in this, once you start focusing on a particular task, really there'll be nothing to stop you. You'll just be able to keep going with it. Okay, this is especially the case if you're in the Americas and Europe. If you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, you're not really going to feel the full force of Moon trine Pluto until later in the day or into tomorrow. But it's always going to happen. It's going to happen at some stage. So I do think that that is very constructive. At the same time, when dealing with other people, it's probably a good idea, Capricorn, to be a little bit open-minded. You might think that you have understood everything, that you know who you like, you know who you don't like, you know who's good for you. But I think you should be open to a surprise. You might realize that how useful someone could be quite suddenly. Someone who you didn't really think was important could suddenly make their influence felt. And you might actually have to re-evaluate another person. You might have perhaps written them off as being useless, and then suddenly realize that, hold on, this person has got something to offer. Now, it could work the other way. For example, you think that someone can be trusted and you realize that they're an absolute deadbeat. That is possible, but I'm inclined to be a little more on the side of the positive, to be that you might suddenly realize that someone, it can really be helpful in your life, someone who you hadn't taken seriously in the past. So that is something, Capricorn, that you do need to consider. Aquarius. As you know, Pluto is moving through your sign, and on and off it's going to stay in your sign for a very long time. Okay, Pluto does briefly move out of Aquarius and back into Capricorn in the autumn, right at the end of the year. But after that, quickly goes back into Aquarius. And today, the moon is moving into Gemini. So when the moon moves into Gemini, it makes a trine aspect to Pluto. And I think that movement into Gemini is pretty fortunate, because I get the impression that perhaps over the last few days you may be being a little bit stuck in your ways. You find it difficult to make change. Movement may have been almost irritating. You just were happy in your world. But with the moon moving out of Taurus into Gemini, that's out of a fixed sign. Remember, Taurus is a fixed sign, moving into a mutable sign. For you, Aquarius, that creates more opportunities, and it makes you feel freer. There are things you can do, new things you can do, and you have a chance to make an impact in really quite a sort of fun, creative kind of way, because I think your sense of fun is starting to move through the gears upwards. Maybe it's not in top gear right now, but maybe I think tomorrow it could be in top gear. And I think that you just have to perhaps relax a little, because I think that moon trine Pluto, it's not like a square. Square can be really intense and passionate and wanting to hold on to everything. Trine is different. It's about creating an easy transformation and turning something perhaps which used to be rather boring into something interesting and enlightening. While this is going on, I suppose I have to point out that the conjunction between Mars and Saturn, which was exact yesterday, it is still in effect. Mars and Saturn are really close to each other still. Now, Mars is moving away from Saturn, but it's close enough to be irritating. So there is an irritating influence, something you want to get rid of, but you can't get rid of. It might have a financial, career, or business dimension. Something that you might feel that it's just preventing you from enjoying life to its full, because you have to worry about it, you have to be bothered about it. I wouldn't be too bothered about it, because the situation, it looks as if it's past peak. Mars, as I said, is moving away from Saturn. So perhaps there's nothing you need to do. You just need to allow the situation to develop, allow the situation to just get weaker and weaker until it eventually goes away. So that's one approach. But it may also be that with Mars having some distance with Saturn, there may be some objectivity coming in. So there might have been a financial, business, or career issue that had been really bothering you, and you couldn't quite make sense of it. But today, it's becoming clearer. Because there's that distance, because Mars is not exactly conjunct Saturn, also it helps the fact that the Moon is in Gemini. Moon moving into Gemini, which is a mutable sign. That does make you, Aquarius, just a little bit more flexible, allows you to see different possibilities. And so maybe today, Aquarius, you have a chance to defuse an annoying situation, and perhaps you can sort it out. If you can, I think that would be really good. Finally, I need to say something about relationships. From an Aquarian perspective, the Sun is your relationship ruler. After all, the Sun rules Leo, and Leo is your opposite sign. The Sun is conjunct Mercury. This does mean that there are people who have got a lot to say. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, the Sun is symbolic, perhaps, of another person. Mercury is the communication planet. You put Sun and Mercury together, you get someone who's talking a lot. And you then have to consider what that someone might be talking about. And the Sun-Mercury conjunction could be problematic, because the Sun may block Mercury out. We get perhaps the image of someone talking without listening, saying things which they're very sure about, but which in practice they don't really understand. There is a lack of understanding in some of the people you're coming across, some of the people you're listening to. And the question is, what do you do about the situation? Do you argue back? Say, hold on, do you really know what you're talking about? Do you ignore what you're hearing? Or do you just walk away? So when you hear someone talking a lot, do be careful and make a decision about what you're going to do. What you shouldn't do is believe what anyone says at face value, because there's going to be a high degree of subjectivity. You know, people may claim to be rational, but in fact, everything they're saying is based on their subjective view of the world. And as an Aquarius, I think you recognize that. And you then have to decide what to do. I probably suggest that you should not engage in a heavy argument. You've just had this Mars-Saturn conjunction. It's separating. I don't think it's a time for argument. I think probably you should just let people say what they have to say, and perhaps at a later stage, maybe in a few days' time, you can maybe address the problems with what they're saying. So maybe today you should just let people talk and leave the argument and analysis for another day. Pisces, there is still this conjunction between Mars and Saturn in your sign. As I said yesterday, I don't think that this Mars-Saturn conjunction is necessarily a problem. I think that this Mars-Saturn conjunction could actually be quite strengthening, because it creates the impression that you are a very organized person who is in full control. When I looked at charts of people who have Mars conjunct Saturn, very often people who have Mars conjunct Saturn in their chart are in control of their lives, and they're able to exercise control over other people. And with this Mars-Saturn conjunction in Pisces, it may almost be as if you temporarily have a Mars-Saturn conjunction in your chart. So perhaps you can feel what it's like to be a person with Mars-Saturn. And I think, Pisces, you are going to want to be in control. Saturn's moving through your sign. It's been moving through your sign for a year. Saturn is about structure. This is what Pisces wants, and this is what Pisces needs. And so today, I think that you are going to be able to really make things happen on your terms. It may not be fun, but it may be at the same time necessary. Though what's also going to be important for you is for you to be fairly self-contained. I don't think you're going to want to be reliant on anyone today. You know what you can trust, you know who you can trust, you know what places you can trust, and that's probably what's going to motivate your life, going for the places, people and things that you trust, and not feeling any need to stray outside of that private world. But Pisces, if you want, you are able to exercise a huge amount of power. So if something is not entirely going your way, you can suddenly make it happen with great force. It'll almost come from nowhere. Of course, you need to choose your battles well. You don't want to assert massive force for no reason at all. You can probably only do it once. It's like those games, isn't it, where you have this special card and you can decide when you want to play this special card. And what you don't want to do is play this special card at a moment where you can't really benefit from this special card. So today you have a special card. And it's up to you when you play this special card. And just make sure you display the special card at the right moment, because if you display it at the wrong moment, then in a way that would be a wasted opportunity. But Pisces, you have to accept that you don't always have to be there. You don't always have to be asserting yourself, and I don't think you're really going to want to engage too much with the world. I mean, it's a complicated world, isn't it? And I think on your own, you are going to be pretty effective. And going back to the special card, maybe it's about choosing your appearance. Perhaps there's one person, one situation you need to engage with. You just turn up, announce yourself, tell people what you want to happen, assert yourself, and job done. and then you can fade into the background, because I think in many respects you will be happiest today when you are fading into the background. But don't worry, you're still there. It's just how you feel most comfortable, and I don't think that today you're really going to want to be center stage. Those are the 12 signs, and what I want to do now is look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 60, which is limitation. In fact, it was the only hexagram I got because it doesn't move. There were no moving lines. And limitation is about restricting ourselves, but not in an excessive way. And that's something that I Ching is very clear about warning us about. So we mustn't torture ourselves with limitation. For example, if we're concerned about our weight, that doesn't mean that we eat nothing all day, we fast. If a limitation is painful, then it's probably not something we should be engaging in. Of course, I understand that some limitations need to be gone through. For example, if we're giving up alcohol, tobacco, or heroin, or whatever we're addicted to, yes, in that case we have to go through some pain. But in most cases we shouldn't be limiting ourselves if it's really, really painful, because that kind of limitation is not constructive. So we need to just be perhaps moderate in how we limit ourselves. There is a limit to what we can do, and we just have to focus on that limitation. And that kind of sounds a bit vague, and maybe to understand what's going on with this hexagram better, it might be a good idea to think in terms of a nuclear hexagram. And the nuclear hexagram is the hexagram in the middle, when we knock out the top and the bottom lines. So if you imagine those 4 lines in the middle, that would be, we put the top 3 of those 4 lines on top and the bottom 3 of those 4 lines on the bottom, and that gives us a nuclear hexagram, the corners of the mouth. Now, the corners of the mouth, from a perspective of the Wilhelm translation, talks about understanding someone by what they eat. So if you know what someone feeds on, then you can get an understanding of what kind of a person they are. But there is an alternative way of looking at the corners of the mouth, which I think is more appropriate for understanding this hexagram of limitation. So the view of Greg Winkup is that he translates the corners of the mouth more as bulging cheeks. And that is about perhaps eating too much. We've ate loads of stuff, and we're full of food, and we've been greedy, and then we have to digest it all. We have to eat what we've got in our mouths. And I suppose if you regard it a bit like a rodent that's full of food, that rodent is vulnerable at that point, because that food hasn't been digested. It perhaps could be taken away from it, and we've taken on a great deal with the corners of the mouth. And it's going to take us some time to digest it all. And this is a nuclear hexagram. This is the underlying situation behind limitation. So the reason we have to limit ourselves is because there's been a lot going on. I mean, astrologically, we could say, well, we just had the new moon eclipse and we had Mars conjunct Saturn. There may be other things going on that we've committed ourselves to, and it's just too much. And we can't do anything short term because we have to digest it all, and we certainly can't take on anything new. And perhaps that's a real meaning of limitation and how we need to bring limitation into our life. So if we get an offer today, someone wants us to do something, we should probably say no, because we've got enough on our plate. Again, there's the food analogy. We've got too much on our plate. Or maybe we've got enough on our plate, but we certainly don't want to have anything more on our plate. And there's the limitation. And once we've digested it all, then perhaps we can think about what we're going to do next. But short term, we need to restrict ourselves to what we can deal with. Okay, so I think it's now time to go back to the astrology. And I wanted to firstly finish off with the Mars-Saturn conjunction. Now, when I looked at the Mars-Saturn conjunction, I actually put up a map, an astrocartography map. Let me just show you what I did. This is what I did yesterday. So yesterday, this was the Mars-Saturn conjunction that took place yesterday, April the 10th. And what I did was I set up an astrocartography map. So in other words, I did a map and to try to work out where this Mars-Saturn conjunction might have its maximum effect. I've no idea really whether this technique is going to work, but there was the Mars-Saturn conjunction visit all the places on Earth where it's on the IC, and you can see that it goes up through Africa, goes through Libya, and goes through looks as if it goes through Poland, actually, doesn't it? It goes through Poland, goes through the north coast of Poland, goes through the Balkans. So maybe this is an area that we might see something quite dramatic between now, maybe, and the next Mars-Saturn conjunction. So it may actually be quite a long-term picture of where to expect Mars-Saturn to have maximum effect, although there are other places where the Mars-Saturn conjunction could have an impact. Look, you see Mars-Saturn goes through Argentina, goes through Chile, goes through Peru, goes through the tip of Cuba, and gets pretty close to New York. So this may actually say something about the Americas as well. But the question is, does this really work? I mean, is it real to just set up a chart for a Mars-Saturn conjunction and just see if it has any impact? So what I thought I would do is look at a previous Mars-Saturn conjunction. So let's look at a previous Mars-Saturn conjunction. So there was a Mars-Saturn conjunction on February the 1st, 1938. And Mars-Saturn conjunctions are quite rare. And, I mean, they're quite rare in the sense that they happen every few years. They're not something that happens every month. And so the February the 1st, 1938 Mars-Saturn conjunction was the Mars-Saturn conjunction before the start of the Second World War. So if Mars-Saturn conjunctions work, you'd expect that Mars-Saturn conjunction to be shown up, wouldn't you? And so this is a Mars-Saturn conjunction set for Poland. set for Warsaw. And this Mars-Saturn conjunction was in Aries on February the 1st, 1938. Remember, Germany invaded Poland on September the 1st, 1939. So this was about 18, 19 months before this country was invaded. And the midheaven was at 3 degrees 49 Aries, and the Mars-Saturn conjunction was at 132 Aries. So that is probably good enough. And that Mars-Saturn in Aries, that is about attack, being in Aries, and it was conjunct the midheaven. So I think that is perhaps a good illustration of how the Mars-Saturn might be working. I think it is useful, just on the basis of this, to look at the Mars-Saturn conjunction. Let me just do an astro map of that, and I'm going to set it for Poland. Now, the trouble about setting it for Poland is this program doesn't have the map for Poland's borders prior to the Second World War, so you have to kind of imagine what Poland would look like. So this is modern Poland. Of course, Poland now is rather different, but you can see that certainly in terms of modern Poland and Warsaw, this is Pluto conjunct the ascendant line. This is from 1938. Pluto conjunct the ascendant, crossing the Mars-Saturn conjunction, going right through Poland. The border between Poland and Germany would have been closer to this line here. So it would have been more appropriate using the old borders. The old borders, this is probably fairly close to the old Germany-Poland border, the border that would have been crossed when Germany invaded. So it's actually more accurate than it looks. So yes, I think that that does seem to illustrate that this technique may be valid. And Poland is configured again. Now, I don't think in terms of the current Mars-Saturn conjunction. So the Mars-Saturn conjunction right now for April the 10th, 2024, if we actually do a map of Poland, let's do a map of Poland again. Now we've got there's that Mars-Saturn on the IC is going through Poland again. Now, does that mean that, for example, Russia is going to invade Poland? No, I don't think it does mean that. I think that this Mars-Saturn conjunction may be talking about instability in Poland and more about an internal crisis in Poland, perhaps. But not just now. As we can see, this can be a year or more ahead between now and the next Mars-Saturn conjunction in a few years' time. So anyway, this is just an attempt to back up what I was saying by using astrocartography to look at the Mars-Saturn conjunction. And I suppose also one might want to look at the Mars-Saturn conjunction immediately prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is a chart set for London. And there you can see that this Mars-Saturn conjunction, March the 31st, 2020, there was a Mars-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees 40 Aquarius. Now that's really interesting because 0 Aquarius was the degree at which we had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the end of 2020. And I really saw that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction as being about Russia and the ascendancy of Russia. At least that's what I wrote in 2020, before I knew about the Ukraine war. I wrote on my blog about that. But we have this repeated theme of the Mars-Saturn conjunction. Then we might want to relocate this chart, because this chart is set for Westminster. We might want to relocate the chart to Kiev. So this is the Mars-Saturn conjunction in 2020 set for Kiev. And it kind of fits, doesn't it? Because at the time of this conjunction, Uranus was very close to the descendant in Kiev, and the Mars-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius was trine Uranus, and square Uranus. Mars-Saturn was square Uranus, and it was also square the ascendant. So what we had was this Mars-Saturn square Uranus hitting the ascendant in Kiev. So again, I'm thinking that it really might be useful to look at the charts of Mars-Saturn conjunctions, because they are uniquely malefic, this Mars-Saturn, from a collective sense. I think on an individual level, we have to deal with them in our own way. And as ordinary individuals, we find ways of dealing with Mars-Saturn constructively. But as a collective energy, Mars as the lesser malefic, Saturn as the greater malefic, they represent a uniquely difficult pair associated with death and destruction. And I think it is often a good idea to set up a chart for the precise moment when the Mars-Saturn conjunction becomes exact, and to see where on Earth that conjunction hits home. Okay, so that's the conjunction from a sort of more political perspective, and what I want to do now is consider it in terms of people. And one person I want to look at that several people have mentioned is Dolly Parton. Now, with Dolly Parton, I really don't know anything about her. I know she's a country singer, country and western, but that's all I know about her, really. I know what she looks like. Everyone knows what she looks like. And there's her chart, January the 19th, 1946, 8:25, born in Walden Creek, Tennessee. And there is her conjunction, Mars-Saturn in Cancer. Now, on the face of it, that Mars-Saturn conjunction is pretty unfortunate. Mars is in Cancer, which is the sign of its fall. Saturn is in its detriment. So from a perspective of essential dignities, Mars and Saturn, they are not well placed. And Mars and Saturn, they're opposition Venus, so widely opposition the Sun. So how is it that Dolly Parton was able to be successful with Mars conjunct Saturn? Of course, the reality is that Mars-Saturn firstly is perhaps describing her early life, perhaps the difficulties and the struggles of her early life, and also the fact that this is someone that would have to work hard. There's got to be a work ethic to Mars-Saturn, and if you have a Mars-Saturn conjunction, it may be a view of the world. You may take the view that the world is a difficult place. And if you take the view that the world is a difficult place, then that potentially gives you an advantage, because you're not going to be lazy. You're going to understand obligation. Obligation is going to be really important there. And having the capacity to just work hard, and the fact that it is dynamic, and dynamism is always important in a chart. Trines and sextiles can be just lazy. You don't feel motivated to do anything. I've got a grand trine in water. I'm quite capable of wasting huge amounts of time just drifting off on vague fantasies and ideas. It just gets me nowhere. But if you've got a conjunction with Mars and Saturn, that certainly gives you structure, and it's really part of a T-square almost, because there's Mars-Saturn, opposition Venus, square Jupiter, square Chiron. Chiron is brought in there. And so you could say that it was a motivator, that Mars-Saturn conjunction. And also I wanted to show this chart that this is someone who is a successful musician, a successful singer. Yesterday I talked about Victoria Beckham's chart. She had a Mars-Saturn conjunction. And sort of Dolly Parton, the same thing. I'm not comparing Dolly Parton with Victoria Beckham. I understand that Dolly Parton is a much more substantial figure than Victoria Beckham. But still, they both had Mars-Saturn conjunctions, and that they were both able to use these Mars-Saturn conjunctions. Another person who has a Mars-Saturn conjunction is the Prime Minister of Denmark. And the Prime Minister of Denmark was born on November the 19th, 1977, and was apparently born at 5:55. Now, where did I get 5:55 from? Well, one of my commenters, Suzanne, she gave me this time of birth, and she said it was 5:55. I'm just taking that at face value. I assume that she's got a source that I don't have access to, so we'll take that as her chart. And if that is the correct chart, in fact, we find there is not a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Well, an extremely wide Mars-Saturn conjunction. There is Mars at 8 Leo. There is Saturn at 0 degrees Virgo. So in fact, this Mars-Saturn conjunction is 22 degrees apart. And in different signs. So can we in any way, shape or form regard that as being a Mars-Saturn conjunction? Well, on the surface, no. But the midheaven is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So if this time is correct, of 5:55 a.m. for the Prime Minister of Denmark, she has got the midheaven exactly on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So if you've got midheaven on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, the midheaven is about how you move forward in life. It's about the ego, and of course it can be about the career and of course your public life. Midheaven on the Mars-Saturn, you regard everything as tough, it's hard work, and there is certainly going to be a work ethic there, and perhaps an acceptance that you're not always going to be popular. But if you want to go into politics, perhaps having the midheaven on the Mars-Saturn midpoint is actually very useful, and perhaps it allows you to make decisions that are not popular. Now, unfortunately, I don't know anything about Danish politics. I sort of skim-read a Wikipedia article, and of course she's having to deal with difficult issues. For example, there's the issue of immigration, but every single country in the Western world has to worry about issues of immigration, including Denmark, and that's something she's having to grapple with, and perhaps realizing that the usual progressive approach has its problems, and so she's having to deal with that. And yes, life is going to be tough for her, but I suppose if you've got the midheaven on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, that is something you accept. Another politician who has got a Mars-Saturn conjunction is Lula I mean, that's what he's called. He's president. I mean, that's what he's called popularly. I know he's got a larger name. Lula is president of Brazil. Now, if you go to astro.com, they do give several possible charts. There is an alternative date of his chart. I think it's October the 5th. And there are question marks about his time of birth. But it does give it, I think, an A rating on astro.com. So I've gone for this time and date of birth. So if I've got this wrong, my apologies, but I did want to look at Lula's chart. This seems to be the chart that astrologers use. There was some YouTube video, but apparently it says that he was born on this date at this time. I don't understand Portuguese. I tried to listen to what he was saying, but not a clue. But like Dolly Parton, he's got a Mars-Saturn conjunction. In fact, he is born pretty close to Dolly Parton. So Mars would have perhaps gone retrograde somewhere between the birth dates of Lula and Dolly Parton. You know, you can, if you see, there's Dolly Parton's Mars-Saturn conjunction. She was born January the 19th, 1946. 20 Cancer. So yes, so with Jupiter-Saturn at 20 Cancer going retrograde. So she was born just after Lula, and so Mars and Saturn would have gone retrograde after Lula's birth, and then a few months later Dolly Parton was born. So Lula and Dolly Parton are very much of the same generation. And if you look at Lula's biography, it was a tough life. I think he was illiterate for a long time. He was working class. There wasn't any money around. He was unemployed. He had issues of unemployment. He lost a finger in an industrial accident. One of his fingers got smashed, and it took him 4 hours to see a doctor, and perhaps because of that wait, he lost his finger. I think that happened in 1964 when he was 19. But that adds to the picture of Mars and Saturn. And then he got involved with the trade union movement. And in the 60s in Brazil, there was sort of military government. I think he got arrested at one stage. So it's a tough life. And that's your Mars-Saturn conjunction. And I suppose you could say the same thing with Dolly Parton. I think her early life was tough. And so if you're tough and you've got Mars-Saturn, you maybe get used to the toughness and you start to be able to use it, and it becomes part of the structure and discipline that you can bring into your life. Now, Lula, as a politician, is perhaps a control freak. That is a possibility. Now, I was looking at an article it was Al Jazeera. It was actually written a year ago in Al Jazeera website by someone called Rafael Garcia, and this would have been just after, I think, that Lula became president on January the 1st, 2023. And it talked about, the article says, a Brazilian ministry of truth is in the making. President Lula's government is proving to be a threat to Brazil's democratic future. The initiative, viewed by many as a tool for President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's administration to delegate criticism it faces under the guise of fact-checking, raised serious concerns about government overreach, freedom of expression, and the future of Brazil's fragile democracy. First proposed in 2020, when Lula was not president, the so-called fake news bill makes it a crime to create or share content that allegedly poses a serious risk to social peace or to the economic order without defining those terms. Then it says, if the proposed bill becomes law, Brazilians can face significant fines or even jail time for sharing harmless political commentary or satire online. At the same time, however, the bill gives complete freedom to politicians to say what they wish online without any consequence. It proposes to remove a power from social networks to ban or suspend the accounts of politicians for sharing content in violation of their terms of service. So you could say that Lula, with this Mars-Saturn conjunction, we are seeing a dark side to this. Now, again, I don't know much or anything about Brazilian politics, but there is a dark side here with this Mars-Saturn conjunction. It can be about a control freak, or the ministry, creating the Ministry of Truth. And when Mars-Saturn gets its hands on the levers of power, then there is a danger that it takes things too far. And so maybe that's what we're seeing with Lula's chart, with this attempts to control social media. And of course, he's recently, I believe, had a spat with Elon Musk, although about something rather different. I think that was about protection of a rainforest. I think the environment is important. I believe, well, certainly Lula is better for the environment than his predecessor, Bolsonaro, who seemed to take great pleasure in tearing down the rainforests or creating laws that make it easy to tear down the rainforests. But I think with Lula's Mars-Saturn conjunction, this is someone who won't go away. I mean, he'd been got rid of once. He had been president before. He was got rid of through some legal mechanism, but Mars-Saturn just keeps coming back. And this time, it appears he wants to be in control, though one should mention that people in Brazil, they were talking about controlling social media before he became president. But still, this does demonstrate that with Mars-Saturn, a Mars-Saturn conjunction, you certainly can be successful. And there's a grittiness to Mars-Saturn, to a Mars-Saturn conjunction, that allows you to be successful, that allows you to become very powerful. And another chart, very quickly. Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service, founded December the 13th, 1949, famous for its operations, but including its operations that involve killing people. And Mossad indeed has a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Virgo, which is sort of square the sun. So Virgo wants to get the details right. So that could be the careful planning of operations to kill people. That fits Mars-Saturn. Okay, that's enough with Mars-Saturn. And I want to now look at the horoscope of the Pope Francis. No particular reason, but I do understand that he has had recent health issues. So what actually would you look for in a pope? I'm not too sure about a pope. You would expect a certain religiousness in a pope, wouldn't you? I mean, he's a Sagittarius. I mean, Sagittarius, you could say, is a fairly religious sign. He's got the sun in the 6th house. And it does seem with the sun in the 6th house conjunct the North Node that one of the reasons he became a priest was because he had serious health problems. I believe he had part of a lung problem, of a lung removed. He had cysts on his lungs, when he was a young man, before he decided he wanted to be a priest. And somehow this had a big effect on him, and so in a way pushed him into becoming a Jesuit and becoming ordained as a Jesuit. And it's just interesting that he's got Sun conjunct the North Node. The North Node is his way forward. And so he's got Sun conjunct North Node. That's his way forward. And it relates to the health, but I suppose with Sagittarius there is something health-orientated about it. But to be honest, just looking at that chart, I'm not entirely convinced that I can see religion there. I think that it's easier to see his chart from a religious perspective if you look at his Vedic horoscope. So let me just turn to his Vedic chart. So here's his Vedic chart. In his Vedic chart, he has Saturn in Aquarius in the 9th house. Saturn in Aquarius in the 9th house is religious, and it particularly relates to one god types of religion. I mean, obviously in Hindu astrology, the assumption is that people can have all sorts of ideas about religion. Religion is very important in Indian astrology, and it might say something about what kind of religion you go for. So if you've got Saturn in the 11th, that could represent Judaism or some other one god type of religion that this person might be into. And it is a very strong Saturn. He has Saturn in Pisces in his Western chart, but in his Eastern chart, his Saturn is in the 9th house. And I think that fits, I think it fits just a lot better than his Western chart. And in terms of when he became Pope, because that's what I was thinking, he was declared Pope. This was a moment. Let me just go back to the papacy chart. I just suddenly realized how long he's been Pope for. When the white smoke appeared. The white smoke appeared on March the 13th, 2013. At 7:06 p.m. And I don't know if this is a great time to see that white smoke for the first time. This was when Mars was... there was a Mars conjunct Uranus, and Mars was just crossing the 7th house. So I don't know how his papacy is seen, but this is the beginning of his papacy, and it seems... quite dramatic. It could be a papacy that is racked by sort of controversy, and I suppose you have seen controversy about social issues, and the Pope is trying to be sort of more moderate than usual, perhaps certainly more moderate than his predecessor. But there is the Mars conjunct Uranus. But where does this fit in terms of his life and whatever transits were taking place when he became Pope? So for him, Pluto was crossing his descendant. So there was Pluto crossing his descendant. That's when he became Pope. Now we say that Pope Francis was born at 9 p.m. We don't know for sure, but it was exactly 9 p.m. Could have been earlier, could have been later. So the ascendant might not be exactly 9 Capricorn. It could have been 10, could have been 7, or whatever. So I think we can safely say that Pluto was crossing his descendant when he became Pope. So that doesn't indicate to me wild ambition, wild enthusiasm. Was he really pleased to become Pope? I'm not entirely convinced. It was just a dramatic event from the outside, something almost imposed upon him. And there's Pluto, your Pope. And at the same time, Saturn was sextile his Mercury. So Saturn sextile Mercury is nice. It's about organization. It's about discipline. But it's rather understated. Suddenly Saturn aspecting his Mercury, he just has to get himself together. But it's a sextile. And so I think that is it's quite a fortunate aspect, quite a low-profile aspect, but it's an aspect that got him the papacy. So I do think there is a lack of ambition in terms of the transits. Then you have to consider the solar return. So this is his solar return for December the 17th, 2012, just before he became Pope. And it's just interesting that we have been talking about Mars and Saturn and questioning about, whether or not this Mars-Saturn conjunction is a good thing. And at the time of his solar return, I've set this solar return for Buenos Aires. I believe, that's where he was born. I go for the place of birth for solar returns, not where you are at the time. I think it's reasonable to assume that at the time he was in Buenos Aires or around there. And he had Mars in Capricorn rising. Mars in Capricorn rising is Mars exalted, an exalted Mars rising. That is a really strong Mars. If it had been in a different sign, it might not have been so beneficial. And Mars is in the sign of Capricorn. Mars is in Saturn's sign. And so in the solar return, there's a mutual reception between Mars and Saturn. So Saturn was in Scorpio at the end of 2012 in Mars's sign. Mars was in Capricorn, which was Saturn's sign. So there was a mutual reception between Mars and Saturn there when he, in the solar return before he became Pope. And I think that solar return is really very simple. And it just shows how important angular exalted planets can be. I now wanted to just look at him becoming Pope from a perspective of Vedic astrology. Remember, he became Pope we need to get the time right. He became Pope March 2013. There's the white smoke chart, March the 13th, 2013. So going back to the Vedic chart, if we look at his periods and sub-periods, remember in Vedic astrology you have nine periods of life that cover 120 years. So the one that covered his elevation to the papacy, he was in his Mercury Mahadasha, his Mercury the large dasha, the big dasha, and his smaller dasha was Jupiter. And this is important because he has a Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in his horoscope. There's in his Vedic chart, he has Jupiter in Sagittarius, in its own sign in Sagittarius, and he has Mercury in Sagittarius. So there's a Jupiter-Mercury conjunction in his 7th house. So when you've got two planets that are conjunct each other, and one of them is ruler of the major period and the other is ruler of the minor period, then it's likely to be a very important time. And I think that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction really was activated when he became Pope. So that does fit. And we could have probably said right at the beginning of his life that Mercury Mahadasha, Jupiter minor dasha was going to be a very important period for him. From a negative perspective, we notice that the Pope has a Moon-Venus conjunction in Capricorn. Now, at the moment, he is in his Venus Mahadasha. His Venus Mahadasha started in October 2023. So in October 23, there was a change for the Pope. And him having his Venus in the 8th is not great. Also, Venus is ruler of his 12th house. So I would have thought that things aren't so easy for him now. And I think it's been the case since October. I think that it might be time for the Pope to consider stepping down. His predecessor, Benedict XVI, stepped down. And I think that the time is coming when the Pope needs to consider, does he want to just keep going until he dies? I mean, I suppose that's what traditionally what popes have often done, in fact, invariably done, I think. And he could wait until on February the 13th, 2028, in 4 years' time. He is in his Venus Mahadasha and his Moon Subdasha, and he's got Venus and Moon in the 8th. And I don't know if he really wants to wait until then, because that could be really unfortunate for him. He will be 92. How old will he be? He'll be 90. He'll be 90. I think 91 years old then. But having the Mahadasha and ruler and the Subdasha ruler, both of them in the 8th house, that doesn't look good. So from a Vedic perspective, I think it might be a good idea if he were to step down now, especially if we've had this big change, him moving into the Venus Dasha, and I'm not convinced that Venus is particularly fortunate. Not least because it's in the 8th house and it rules his 12th house, and whenever you've got a dasha change, you do need to consider it. So from a Vedic perspective, I think maybe he should be considering how long he wants to stay as Pope. From a Western perspective, looking at what is going on what is going on at the moment. Remember, I'm looking at this chart. I'm looking at his chart from the perspective of these stories that maybe he's got health issues, and do we see anything else happening? So going back to Pope Francis's chart. So right, there's his chart. He has got Saturn in Pisces. There you see he's got Saturn at 16 Pisces. And he's coming up for his Saturn return. And maybe with the Saturn return, we're looking at his health. We're starting to see him maybe going into a bit of decline here. I think that is reasonable. When does his Saturn return become exact? Well, if his Saturn is at 1630, his Saturn return is exact. Let's have a look. His Saturn return is exact the end of a month on April the 29th. And Saturn will go retrograde later in the year, and it will come back onto his Saturn return. So it really is a Saturn return year for him. We have something else going on in terms of his primaries. So from a primary perspective, we look at the movement of the Earth after he was born. And so the moon will move, the Earth will move after you're born. It moves around, and every degree that the Earth moves represents 1 year. And so he's around 87 years old. So if we move the Earth 87 degrees, what will happen is that the Sun, in that approximately in that 5 or 6 hours after he was born, the sun will start to set, because he was born just after sunset, and the sun will go down in the horizon. And then what happened is that symbolically, around, that would be the beginning of September 2023, the sun made what is known as a mundane conjunction with his Neptune. So if you move the sun down, it makes a conjunction to Neptune. And that was in 2023. And then in September 2024, the sun moves on and makes an opposition to Saturn. So by primary direction, right now the sun is moving towards an opposition to Saturn, and he has this Saturn-Neptune opposition in his chart anyway. And so by primary direction, that Saturn-Neptune opposition is becoming really quite strong. And again, I think we're starting to feel it, and I think this is starting to have an impact on his health. Now, I understand that primary directions are often used to predict death. I am not using this to predict death, but I don't think the Saturn has anything to do with his life. It's not the high leg, the ruler Hyleg, if you want to look it up. The ruler of his life, it's not. His sun is below the horizon. Normally, the high leg has to be above the horizon. So it's not his high leg. So it's not about death, I don't think. But I think it's more about his health. And so that's happening right now. So looking at the Vedic astrology, with his Venus moving, his Venus Dasha having just started, and looking at the primary directions, and the fact that it's his solar return, yeah, we can see why his health is starting to decline. And I think that for all of these reasons, it might be a good idea for him to start to think about stepping down. But it's not for me to tell the Pope what to do. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening. I've been a bit chaotic, moving from place to place and moving from chart to chart, but I hope you found that of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I would be really grateful if you were to like it. If you enjoyed the video and you're not subscribed, I would of course be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.